everybody. Welcome to Military Monday. Today is June the 5th, 2023, and you're here with us at ClearedJobs.Net, where we're going to talk about some cool topics about military hiring. So my name is Bob Wheeler. I'm typically the host of Military Monday, and normally when we do Military Monday, we talk to a recruiter or a hiring manager, something like that, some person who's involved in military hiring at that organization. But today we've got an even better thing. We've got Kathleen Smith. She's the Chief Marketing Officer from ClearedJobs.Net, because we're going to be talking about some podcasts. And Kathleen has been talking to lots and lots of people. So she's kind of gathered lots of information. So we're going to be talking about that. So again, Kathleen Smith's going to say hello. While she's saying hello, if you guys are following us on LinkedIn, or if you're hear from somebody, feel free to drop a line. Tell us in the comments section where you're from, where you at, what branch of the service are you in, when are you going to get out, that kind of stuff. Let us know who you are. But Kathleen, do you want to let everybody know who you are?
Sure. So this is interesting. I'm usually the host and now being the guest. So it's fun to be here. Who am I? Well, 20 years here at ClearedJobs.Net, a veteran-owned firm, and just have loved the last 20 years supporting the mission, working in the intel community in the DoD space. When I first started with ClearedJobs.Net, one of my jobs was to go out to the various different military bases here in the Washington, D.C. area and lead these, what we used to affectionately refer to as social media and sandwiches, because a lot of people were not adept at that time on working on a job board. What do you do on a job board? What do you do with social media? Are you on LinkedIn? Are you on Facebook? So I've run the entire gamut of presenting for the organization, being out in the community. There are several of the agencies in this area that I would lead their transition classes. So I'm primarily the person that's out there in the community. So rather than call myself the Chief Marketing Officer, I usually call myself the Chief Outreach Officer. But really excited to share what we have been learning on our podcast.
Yeah, Kathleen has been talking to so many people for like she said, for a long time. But we're going to be talking about what she's doing with podcasts, because she's one of the hosts of the podcast series at ClearedJobs.Net. So, first of all, when we just think about podcasts, like why would a veteran, even what's the use of podcasts for veterans? Podcasts, it's not always true crime podcasts or funny things or following TV shows, stuff like that. Their podcasts have got lots and lots and lots of different uses. They're just basically longer form interviews, for lack of a better term there. And when you're as a veteran, when you're getting out, one of the real values of podcasts, if you're talking about business related podcasts, is it can help you break out of that bubble, so that instead of just talking to other people on base or on post, getting advice just from from people who are still in the military, you can get some advice from people who are out. And it's not just advice. A lot of times, as you learn about companies and learn about the environments, you pick up the lingo. You just really can. I always tell people, you want to marinate in your industry, and podcasts are one of the best ways to just marinate in any industry, whatever industry it happens to be. When it comes to the ClearedJobs.Net podcast series, it focuses on government contractors. So, Kathleen, you want to, what's been about over a year now we've been doing these podcasts. So what's unique about what's the ClearedJobs.Net series like?
So the ClearedJobs.Net podcast is called Security Cleared Jobs, Who's Hiring and How. And it's interesting because we have been doing this podcast for over a year, maybe 14 months now. And I am joined on our podcast by Rachel Bozeman. Rachel, as you know, Bob, was one of our customers, very familiar with the government contracting world, what it is like on the recruiter side, how to talk to candidates, how to develop the overall strategy to recruit candidates, and also recruiting a lot of veterans. So we talked to cleared facilities employers, their recruiting staffs. And it's fascinating to me in all of these podcasts is that we standardly think that everyone hires the same way, that they interview the same way, that they have the same strategies when it comes to ramping up for a contract or hiring veterans or networking with veterans, but everyone has something a little different. And I think what's great about Security Cleared Jobs, who's hiring and how, is we really delve into those intricacies of different ways that people are hiring within this space. And it also gives the cleared job seekers a really great way to look behind the curtain and see what recruiters are really thinking about when they're looking over your resume or when they're preparing for an interview process. And it's been really great, especially post pandemic, to talk to companies that have figured out how to offer hybrid jobs, how to offer remote jobs, how to still support the mission, but also support a work life balance. And it's been really fascinating talking to many of the recruiters and hiring managers on the conversations that they've had with their customers on how to create work life balance for cleared job seekers. So it's been a great run. We really love it. We are let's see, we have been doing this, as I said, 14 months. We release every new episode on Wednesday mornings, Work Wednesday, and we're on all of the major podcast platforms.
Kathleen, one of the things I love about the series too over the last 14 months is your the variety of the companies that you're talking to. I mean, there's some of them are very big companies. You talk to people who are in large organizations. You talk to some companies that are smaller organizations. You talk to companies that people maybe they've never heard of the organization, but it turns out they're not small at all. They just, you just didn't hear about it. So it's really kind of a cool way to find out about all those different players in the space. And I think a lot of military veterans, when they're coming out, maybe a few names in government contracting, but there's just so many. I mean, you guys have done, tons of episodes with different companies, haven't you?
We have. And what's fascinating to me, as you said, we all think of the top 100 government contractors, we know their names. But even when we're talking to some of the bigger government contractors, most of the recruiting is done in individual business units. So, really getting down to that level and understanding which is the space division, which is the missile defense division, which is Space Force. So, what are the various different divisions and how they work together as a team to support various different contracts? And
Yeah.
then the smaller companies, the small to medium sized companies that are possibly a little bit more agile, but also might have a new creative way of recruiting, which is attractive to a lot of people because, as we have learned over 20 years in business, is that every recruiter is different for the kind of job that they are recruiting for. And every job seeker is very different. So it's really great to see a lot of innovation and creativity in the recruiting space.
Yeah, and some of those smaller companies, it's there's so many things as a veteran. I remember when I was coming out of the military, I was in the Navy for 20 years, and when I was coming out, there was just so many things I just didn't even know. And when you listen to these things and you learn about the companies and you learn about their culture and you learn about how they got to be the way that they are and how they're doing things, what they're looking for, you start to realize the types of things that all companies kind of have in common, but you also learn things that each companies are a little bit different, and you really I think that's where you can appreciate the landscape so much better by listening to not just a podcast, but like the series to learn about this organization compared to that organization, right?
hmm And one thing that you can do when you go to our podcast page on our website is you can scan the transcript of the entire interview. So, what's really nice about that is if you're looking to develop your top 10 list of companies that you're interested in going to work for, or if you're preparing for an interview, you can basically scan the transcript and say, it is going to answer that particular question. I'm going to go in and zoom on that. Now, not that everyone would leave it to the last minute to listen to a podcast episode before they went on an interview, but just in case you did that, we do have that option available for you.
Yeah, you could even do that before you went to a job fair too. If you were going to a job fair and you saw one of those companies that was going to be at the job fair, you could scan it, listen to the podcast. Great way to, when you get to the job fair, to bring up and say, "Hey, I talked to I heard your podcast. That was very interesting." A great thing to learn from. As you talk about those the things that are going on in the podcast, you're talking about all kinds of stuff. There's but veteran hiring is frequently a topic. It's not the only topic by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a just we'll get into some specifics here in a second. But what's the vibe like as far as veteran hiring? Are companies still looking for veterans? I know a lot of veterans sometimes think that it's just kind of like a cliche that people are saying those types of things. What's the overall vibe before we start getting into the specifics?
Great question. So it is interesting. There is a slight shift in a bit of the vibe. People are still very interested in hiring veterans. They're still interested in engaging with veterans and networking. We are hearing a little bit more about not ramping up as quickly as we heard in years past. So I think that that is one thing I would really tell a lot of transitioning veterans and transitioning military personnel, and we're going to cover that in some of our snippets from the episodes, is definitely have a plan and definitely don't leave it to just one shot of one application. You're going to have to definitely have a strategy and definitely work that strategy. And it's amazing over the years that I've been talking to transitioning veterans how many people leave that strategy and that plan until they're in their TAP class rather than doing the networking, doing the research, your favorite term, the marinating in the industry. You really need to do that now.
Yeah. So at the end of 2022, we basically put together a best of for veteran hiring. So if well, I'm sure that we'll be linking to that episode in the LinkedIn comments here in a second. But it was an episode where we had gone through and pulled different pieces where people talked specifically about veteran hiring, and just kind of stitched that into one specific podcast based on 2022. And Kathleen, you said that we got three of those. I think that the podcast episode had like 9 or 10. But
Mhm.
three things specifically that you kind of really recall. One of them was you're talking to Taryn Lazaroff from Noblesse. And what do you remember about that?
So, one, I mean, as you said, we have talked to many of our recruiters talking about the various different strategies that they have and what they advice they give to hiring military personnel. And one that comes up frequently is the use of military lingo. And it's understanding what your audience is all about and understanding if your audience is going to understand military lingo. And Taryn was really great in the sense that willing to sort of laugh at themselves as far as, okay, Taryn had, was from a military family, but had not served themselves. And so looking at terms like OCONUS and what does that mean, and going into recruiting a specific personnel. And Taryn's boss said, please reach out to John. They're very interested in joining our team. They're in theater. Give them a call. Taryn went, great. I studied drama in college. We'll have lots to talk about. And as soon as the call started, Taryn realized that it wasn't theater with a drama major, but it was a different kind of theater. So we're so used to throwing around terms and phrases that we know our audience is going to understand, but realize that most people are not going to understand the terminology that you're using to describe the work that you're doing, not going to understand the kind of responsibilities you have and the terms that you're using to describe that. So sometimes going back and listening to other podcasts and listening to their business terminology or talking to other people and say, what does this mean to you? Because you want to be that ambassador of yourself and being able to translate your experience without using military lingo.
Yeah, you know what I love about the podcast too is because you hear as a veteran or when you're coming out the TAP class, there's all these cliches of pieces of advice that people give you. Don't do this, don't do that. You might even hear like a snippet story, like what Kathleen just shared a story. The cool thing about the podcast is you're hearing it from the recruiter, and in this case, she was kind of laughing at herself at what she learned, but it really put a human face on the recruiter, put a human face or voice, whatever you want to say, on the whole process, and it makes you just really realize how you can connect with that company. And then when you feel more connected as a veteran, now you're starting to feel more comfortable when you're talking to people. You're realizing that they really are just real people that are trying to do a real job, and they're, so that personal point was amazing. Um, One of your next ones there, Kathleen, was Mike Giovanetti, was somebody um, that you spoke with at Axiologic Solutions, I believe, right?
Yes. So Mike had a really great point, which was the fact that in the military, we don't really have, the opportunity or really putting in a position of interviewing for our next position. There may be some kind of meeting, but a true interview process, a true interview, phone screen, text screen, meeting with the customer, meeting with the team, those kinds of interviews we don't experience within the military. So my suggestion was apply for jobs. And if there's an interest, if there is a point where you're going to start doing the interview, definitely go on as many interviews as possible, because you want to get into that practice. You want to understand where you lock up, understand that there are some questions that you may not have the ready-made answer for. So really going back and saying, I'm going to take all of the interviews as possible. I'm going to talk to as many people. I'm going to have my elevator speech down. I'm going to practice, 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 because when that dream job comes along, you want to go in and be just rock solid on your interviewing and being able to lock that job up.
Absolutely. And that, like I said, Mike, I remember that episode as well. Mike did a terrific job of talking about everything. So as we're moving away, one more that Kathleen remembers from the big episode there was a gentleman by the name of Joshua Ewell from a company called Elsync. This is, again, some of these companies, Noblus, Axiologic Solutions, Elsync, these aren't necessarily the biggest names, but they're pretty good sized companies. I mean, a lot of these have got a lot of openings, a lot of opportunities is what I was trying to say there. So what do you remember about Josh Ewell and Elsync there, Kathleen?
So this is great because it really goes to my planning background. I plan things out, 2-3 years in advance. So what's very amazing is what Josh said about having a plan. Now, of course, there are a lot of people who say, well, I plan to be in for 10 years, or I plan to be in for 25 years, or this is what I want to do when I get out. But Joshua is really pointing down, once you're getting to about 2 years from your separation, your retirement, really setting down the plan, similar to many of the things that you talk about, Bob, as far as marinating in the industry, really talking about where do you want to live and what kind of work do you want to have, and doing your research so you can do your networking, and then have a strategy, because he said he was amazed at how many people he knew who stressed through the entire transition process. Are they going to get a job? Are they going to do everything right? And then the people he met who were actually having fun through their transition. They were actually enjoying the process. They were actually prepared for the transition and then really enjoyed it and was able to make such more positive impact on their interviewing, on their networking, and ended up in much better jobs than they would have ever thought.
Yeah. So what we've just talked about there, that came all from one episode that we had pulled stuff from 2022. If you go to ClearedJobs.net and go to podcasts, you'll see the whole list, and you can see what's going on for 2023. You can see what's already been out there. You can see the name of the person, the topic that was talked about, the company. So great. You can subscribe on Apple iTunes, on Spotify, things like that. But take a look at all of those things, and you can go back and look at all of the different companies that Kathleen and Rachel have talked to over the course of the last 14 or 15 months, and it's still going on. I mean, there's upcoming episodes too. I mean, Kathleen, you're I know you're doing you're doing some interviews this afternoon after this. I mean, you're always doing these types of things. So besides looking backwards, of what's already happened, great information there. What kind of things are on the near horizon for the podcasts?
So yes, we do have recording goes on pretty much every week. We're already scheduled out through the end of the summer. So the one thing that we make sure of is that we always have an episode to release every Wednesday. So it is a podcast that you can rely upon that will be there every single Wednesday for you, with some kind of tip sheet, some kind of interview, maybe even a wrap up. And every now and then I do release a blooper episode, but that's just for fun. I'm here on LinkedIn. But we had a conversation last Wednesday, with Sean Deverud from 6Gen. And Sean actually isn't former military. He was actually with the FBI for a very long career. But he was sharing that his entire C suite is veterans, and a good portion of their management staff are veterans. And they say that they make it their mission to go out and network with as many active duty personnel as possible. They expand their networks, even though they've already retired, already separated. They keep their networking going as far as making sure that they know what the current contracts are, who's working on them. So his point was be sure you're maintaining your network. Don't just wait to network once you're transitioning. While you're still working, you can network. You can still have those conversations. You can get to know a company. You can get to know their culture. You can get to know what kind of contracts they're on. So doing that network ahead of time will make the transition so much easier because you will have friends and colleagues rather than just, strangers to have those conversations with.
And these episodes, Kathleen, they're what, 30 minutes long or so? Is that roughly about the right?
It's about 30 minutes. It depends. Sometimes we go very long, but we have this absolutely fabulous producer who has an intern as well. And the two of them make sure that we edit down to just the really important content and make us all look really good. So thanks to our fabulous
Yeah.
producer in the production booth.
So that's a great point though, is that they're not very long. So it's the kind of thing where you can spend 30 minutes a day on your driving. If you're stuck in traffic, I mean, if you're in the Northern Virginia area, there's always traffic. If you're, even if you're other places too, if you're overseas, if you got time to kill, 30 minutes a day. And this is when you've still got 6 months, a year left, 2 years left in the service, it's helping you to kind of break out of that bubble, to learn about how the business world operates, so that when you finally do go to TAP class, or when you do get out and you're going to start meeting people at job fairs, you're comfortable with the lingo is one of the biggest things. It's definitely one of the biggest things that you got going on. Speaking of job fairs, I want a little quick plug for a few. If you are in the Northern Virginia area and you have a CI or a full scope polygraph, we've got a job fair in Tyson's Corner on this week. It's in 2 days from now. You can swing by there. You can go to ClearedJobs.net to go to job fairs and you can register. When you do that, even if you're not in the area, your resume goes to everybody, all the different companies who are going to be there. Also later on this summer, no matter where you're at, we've got a virtual job fair scheduled for all clearance levels. So you can take a look at that. I noticed in the comments section that somebody, I believe it was Nathan, mentioned that he's in San Antonio and he's getting out in August or September of this year. We actually have a San Antonio job fair coming up for all clearances. And I believe that is in August or September. I can't remember which.
I know it's August, but I can't remember the date.
I
Not
was
off
going
the
to
top
talk
of my
about the
head.
ones that were right on the horizon, but when I saw Nathan's comment there, I wanted to make sure that you knew about that job fair. Again, if you go to ClearedJobs.net, go to job fairs, you can see all the stuff that's coming up. I saw a couple of we had a lot of great comments that came in. Questions like, should you focus on your management skills or your unique skills when looking at an application strategy? I think it really depends upon the job. This is from a gentleman by the name of Mark. I think that you should be prepared to do a little bit of both. I think that's the nimble part, but what it really does come down to is building your network, talking to people so that you can do either one of those things, because a job strategy it's not just a single line. It's not just point A to point B. You've got to have parallel paths going on at the same time. You can always find me, by the way, too, guys. Anybody here in these comment section, we'll try to catch up with other folks, but you can hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm Bob Wheeler at ClearedJobs.net. You can follow ClearedJobs.net on LinkedIn. We have a careers page that you can jump inside there. If you subscribe to our newsletter, we've got great tips that come out on our newsletter. Also in the newsletter every week is a link to the podcasts as well that come out every week. So that's what we've got going on for those things. Kathleen, is there anything? It's been a great conversation learning about the podcast. Like I said, I remember about a year and a half ago when we just decided to launch this, and you were letting everybody know. I think it's, from most people I talked to, I think it's been a smashing success. I mean, really great episodes, very high quality production. Anything else that you want to say before we close this down for today?
Well, yes, it's been a lot of fun, and as I told a lot of people, I was dragged into it kicking and screaming. It was not something that I was really interested in doing because I don't mind being on video, but being consistently on a podcast, it's a commitment, and I'm really glad that I was pushed into it. So, yes, my entire team who pushed me into it. Yes, I'm happy about it. We do have an interesting conversation that's coming up this week, actually this afternoon, with Angelica New from Millennium Corporation, who actually is going to be sharing the fact that they give offer letters to transitioning veterans 12 to 18 months out before they're ready to separate. So they're reaching way deep into the veteran talent pool and having those early conversations. And I think that's a very interesting strategy because it's getting people in the middle of their work so they're really excited about the kind of work they're doing and being able to find work outside of the military that will be just as fulfilling and just as challenging. But do please subscribe or follow for our podcast. We're consistent with making sure that we give you tips from our recruiters and cleared facilities employers to make sure that you have the best knowledge and the best tips on how to ace that interview, get that offer letter, and make sure that your transition is very successful.
All righty. Well, Kathleen, thanks for taking some time out of your day to talk to us before you start talking to everybody else after lunchtime today. But we're going to let everybody go. Hit that thing, ClearedJobs.Net. Find the podcasts on Apple, iTunes, on Spotify, however you find however you catch your podcast things. It's a great tool. We're going to let everybody go now. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a wonderful Monday. Bye bye.
Bye bye.